We're now going to look at how we can read from plain text files that exist on disk. So I've got a project here. We haven't got any code written other than what we get by default, but I've added a folder inside the project called data, and within that I've created a text file. The actual extension doesn't matter as long as the content is plain text, but I've called it artists.txt, and we've got a list of musical artists in there. And if I want to do something with that, I need to be able to get that content from that file into my program. And this is not something that's particularly unusual. We might have a project, might build an app, and we might want some data to be available to it. We don't really want to hard code those bits of data into our program. Plus, having it in a text file means we can quite easily change it. Similarly, if we were maybe wanting to do some statistical analysis or some, do some work with some data, we might have a large file of data. We don't have to copy that manually into our program. We want to be able to read that from a file. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, obviously, in order to be able to read it in, we need a container to put it in. This is a list of names, so we can literally strings, so we can store them in strings. Now, sometimes we might be working with numbers, so obviously we would use a numeric data type, but because we're working with strings today, I'm going to create an array list of strings to store them in. Typically, when reading from a file, we don't know how many things we're going to be reading, so we wouldn't want to use an array because that has a fixed size. So I'm going to go with an array list, and we'll call it artists. I need to import the array list class, and we'll make that a new empty array list. Okay. The next thing we need to do is to let the program know where the file that we want is located. So we can do that. There's a type called file, which exists in the java.io, io being input output package. So when we double click on that, it will import the java.io.file type from inside the java.io package. And we can call it, artists file. And we do that by creating a new file object like this, like we'd create a new scanner. And then we pass into the constructor the information that we need to find the file, which is the path to the file. So we can pass in the path to the file that happens to be, as I say, in a folder called data, and it's called artists.txt. Okay, so this will be an IntelliJ from the root of our project. Okay, so that tells the computer now knows where the file is that we want to access. We then need to read the data from it. So we can actually do this using something we've used already, which is the scanner, because as well as providing system.in as the source for the scanner, we can actually provide a file. Okay, so if we say scanner, we'll call this one file scanner. Let me just import the scanner here. Just like we would normally say new scanner. Okay, and this time instead of passing in system.in, we can pass in the artists file. Okay, now we do that, you'll notice that it's come up in red and says there's something wrong. So if we hover over that, we can see what the problem is, and it says unhandled exception java.io.file not found exception. Okay, and this basically says that potentially that file could not exist. Now it does, but if I was to put misspell this and make it dartists, that file doesn't exist, and we could end up with a problem. So we need to ensure that we handle the fact it could go wrong. And to do that, we can use what's called a try-catch block. A try-catch block says, try and execute this code. If it fails, we will catch the what's called the exception that is thrown, and then we can do something else instead. Okay, so we wrap our code in a try block. So I write the keyword try, I put a brace in, I close the brace off. Okay, but a try on its own is not enough. After the try, we need a catch, and then not only do we need some braces, but we need to say what sort of exception we're going to catch. Okay, now if we hover over this, it tells us it's a file not found exception. So we can say catch, and then we put a pair of braces, we write file not found exception, and you'll see it's imported it as well. Okay, so I didn't have to type catch java.io.file not found exception. And then we put the braces. So this is what it tries to execute. If it goes wrong, we come here. Now it's giving me another error because as well as catching the exception, I need to give that exception a name, essentially a bit like a variable, so that if I want to find out more about that exception, I can. The convention in Java for exceptions is just to call them E, okay? But we could call it, it's suggesting various options. We could call it exception, we could call it file not found exception. So it is just a variable name, okay? And it's just a convention, a bit like how we use I for an index. The convention in Java is E for exception, okay? But we could call it, I could put exception there and that would be fine. On this occasion, I'm going to use just E because that's typically what you'll see if you're writing your own code. So here we can say something has failed reading the file, tell the user. Okay, so we might print out a message and say, sorry, we couldn't read the file. The other thing we can do is we can print out the actual exception. This is not normally something we'd want the user to see, but it might be helpful when we're learning. So I'm also going to print out, I'm going to go to my exception, which is called E. I'm going to do dot, and there's an option to get a localized message. So that should give me an English language, a bit of English language information about what has gone wrong. Alternatively, we could use get message, which won't worry about localizing it. Let's actually stick with get message for now. Should be in English anyway, probably American English. Okay, so this is what we handle if something's gone wrong. Okay, but obviously we still need to do something with our file scanner, assuming it's worked. So that warning's gone away now. Okay, now the thing to also be aware of is if it goes wrong here, none of the rest of the code in the try block will execute. Okay, so we just need to know that is the case. Okay, so the next thing we can do is essentially look for all the data in the scanner. Now we're used to using a scanner by doing like string input equals scanner dot next line, okay, but that would only read one line in, and we might have an unknown number of lines of input that we want to get. So instead what we can do is we can create a loop that checks if the scanner has got some more input, and if it has, we can read it in and we can put it into our list of artists. So what we can do is we can say while, and then we can say while the file scanner has next, okay, that will just give us a next line. If we were looking for something in particular, like are we looking for another double or are we looking for an integer, it's got methods to get those as well. So we could, if we wanted a big integer, if we wanted a boolean, we can look for those. Okay, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just wanting to see if we've got any line of input. So we say, well, file scanner has next, and only then do we want to read the information in. So what's different about using the scanner with a file and using the scanner with the console is, with the console, it will wait for input from the user. Okay, if we're reading from file and we try to read something that isn't there, like we go past the end of the file, we'll get an exception thrown and it will say, no, we can't do this. So it's important that we only try and get things while we've got something available from the scanner. So if that is the case, we could say, string artist equals file scanner dot next line. And then we could put that artist into our artists array. So we could say artists dot add artist. We could concatenate this. We could just put artists dot add file scanner dot next line. That's also fine. We don't actually need to put it in a separate variable. It will probably warn me of that in a second when it thinks about it and says you only use this once. Hasn't done yet, but that's an option. Okay, so all being well, if our file's there, we will create a scanner with it. Okay, if it fails because the file's not there, we'll print out an error message. If it works, while we've got some content to read, it will read each line at a time, put it into this variable called artist, and add that string to our array of artists. Obviously, if it's gone wrong, we go here so that array doesn't get filled up and the array stays empty. Okay, now obviously, in order for it to be useful, we might want to do something. So we might, for example, print out our artists. So we could, do a quick for each loop for string artist in artists. Oops, I called it artists. String artist in artists, print out artist. Okay, so all being well, this should work. If we run our code now, we'll see, there we go, we're getting the list of artists out. One thing to note is if we look at our file, we look at our data, okay, currently there's no new line at the end of JSON Derulo, okay? This is just a gap that gets put in automatically when it prints out the output. If I hit enter here and save this file and run it again, go back to main, it hasn't treated that as a new line. That's interesting. Let's just drop a couple more in and make sure it's saved. Maybe I didn't save it. Go back to main. Okay, is it saving? Save all. Let's just run it again. Okay, so in this case, it's not treating there as being any data in. What's interesting? What would be interesting to do? Let's add another artist in there and see what happens with this, because this is obviously particular behavior to the scanner. There we go. So it's reading those in. So it's obviously in this case assuming that unless there's further data, it's not treating empty lines as a new line of data. So the behavior there is slightly different actually from when we're using it with the console. Okay, so there has to be something else later on for it to treat those lines as actually being lines that can be read in. Okay, let's just go back and see what happens if for some reason we point it at the wrong file. So instead of making it txt, we just make it tx. So we've got the wrong file extension now, and we'll run our code again. Okay, and you can see we've got our error message here. Sorry, we couldn't read the file. And you can see it's then telling us, this is the message from the exception, that it's looking for this file, and the particular error is no such file or directory. Okay, so that's quite helpful. We know that there's a problem, and we can go ahead and fix that. Okay, and we should be back to running as normal. So I guess really the only other things to consider are the fact that you don't have to read in a line at a time. Okay, we've got various different options. We could probably, do we have a character? We don't have a character, but if we had numeric data that we wanted to work with, we could use that, and similarly we can we've got those. We can also specify, for example, a pattern of something we're looking for, so we can split things up with a comma. That will require a little bit more reading, which is one of the tasks for this week, to find out how we can look for things that have been separated by commas, for example. There's something called a delimiter, and you can specify a delimiter for a scanner. So that's probably what you want to look for. And then you can, when you use just next, whatever you set as the limiter allows you to read and only up to that particular, I guess, separator. Okay, so that's put fairly simply how we can read data from a text file.